next up, we are going to hear about some work from tribal partners with the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council. My colleague Tom Melnarik is joining us. Tom, for a lot of years, was with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. He has a soils background as well as just working on many water projects, shoreline work, and different conservation projects over his career with Natural Resource Conservation Service. And now is provides civil engineering technician support for the Wisconsin Tribal Conservation Advisory Council. This council has representation from the First Nations of Wisconsin. It's been around since about 2001 and is a unique way tribes come together to work on conservation in the state of Wisconsin.
Pat did a real good job of introducing my position with WCAC, my former career with NRCS. And so I'm going to go through these the first few slides rather quickly. So that's just a little bit of introduction to WCAC there. This slide here is interesting. It shows the 11 federally recognized tribes in Wisconsin, along with Brothertown, that is not federally recognized, but they're working towards that goal. And of the 11 federally recognized tribes, in the last 10 years, 5 of them have built either brand new aquaculture facilities or additions into their existing ones. So we have Lac du Flambeau with a new facility. Red Cliff has got one. Le Coudray has got one. Mole Lake has got a brand new facility, and St. Croix has a brand new facility over there. So a lot of work on tribal aquaculture facilities in the last 10 years in Wisconsin, and some of the other ones here, such as Menominee and Bad River, do have older facilities that they're still running and producing a lot of fish out of them. Each of the new projects, just as a round figure, probably comes with about $1 million price tag on the new facilities. And I was personally involved in the design and construction inspection on 3 of the 5 new ones. So that's kind of been what my earmark project was in my last few years with NRCS. I spent a lot of time working on tribal aquaculture, and now with my new position, I'm working with all of the tribes in Wisconsin, and not just aquaculture, a lot of different things as well. Over 650,000 acres of tribal land in Wisconsin, just as a statistic to throw out at everybody, including 450,000 acres of woods, 50,000 acres of lakes, 80,000 of wetlands, and 600 miles of streams. 22,400 square miles of ceded territory in Wisconsin with treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather. Okay, that's just a list of some of the USDA partners, non-USDA federal partners, state partners, including University of Wisconsin Extension, who's sponsoring our show today. And so I'm going to get right into some of the things, because I come from the technician and engineering background. I'm going to probably show maybe a little bit more than what people would like to see as far as how things were built out there, but I'm going to show a little bit of that, and maybe it'll catch your interest. So this was Mole Lake, a before picture. The woods to the south there needed to be removed in order to fit the ponds in, and so that's an after picture. This was a 2-phase project. In 2012, 2013, it was finished by 2014. This next picture is distorted a little bit, but it's the before picture up at Lac du Flambeau. They did have an existing facility that was, it wasn't level from north to south, which if on the new projects, if you look at the design on them, the end result is ponds that are all at the same level. So in this case, to the north, it was a lot higher in elevation than to the south. All of the ponds had to be manually harvested. And so if you can picture this one in your mind, and keep in mind the pond to the left of your screen, the long one, it kind of gave me the idea as to the new design out there, which is that. So I took that site and changed it into 13 smaller ponds to 6 large ponds. And there's a couple of little collection kettles in the inside of the L shape, and then there is a sediment tank with a rock-lined spillway into the wetland. And the interesting thing about this picture is that it is almost what we call a tailwater recovery, where the water, once it's used in this system, goes into the wetland and then circles back 360 degrees to the pumps in Pokegama Lake that feed the facility. So it's kind of cool in that regard. And in a lot of cases, the tribes did not have to provide this extra measure of cleaning the byproducts at all, because it's pretty innocuous stuff, and the wetland probably would have done a fairly good job, but they chose to build in extra features, and we'll show that later in the slide, but we call them the sediment tank. We can talk a little bit about how that works. So that's an empty pond there. Because of the tribal connection, a lot of people think of maybe a groundbreaking ceremony with a gold shovel or something like that. In this case, at Mole Lake, they have a tobacco ceremony to initiate the project. And so that's what this picture shows. Many of the sites needed some initial work on removing some of the old infrastructure that was there. This is at Lac du Flambeau. And I was earlier in the presentation, I was talking about how the ground on this particular site was not level on the old facility, where that excavator is sitting in the picture. After the construction was finished, it was probably another, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet above where that excavator is sitting right now, to kind of level that site. The whole idea is to not only serve the purpose of creating a facility that'll produce a lot of fish, but I think a good designer also looks at something that fits the landscape really, really nice at the end of the day. And so, in a lot of cases, we look at that, and it takes a lot of work to just make sure that can happen, and a lot of cooperation with the natural resources departments at each of the tribes. This is at Mole Lake. They had to remove a pine plantation, and they made some use out of it, got some value out of it prior to the pond. And some of the work went into the fall and into the winter. Here is Lac du Flambeau's site. They had to do some clearing there, and you can see, you can start to see the scope of the site there. That particular site was about 11 acres. Oops. So these are what we call a wing wall. You can start to see the shape of the pond in the foreground there, and some of the concrete infrastructure that goes into building one of these. There's also, in most cases, some infrastructure as far as water supply. This is Mole Lake's part of Mole Lake's high capacity well water supply system. I like that picture. Just shows the kind of equipment those guys or tools those guys use. This is a collection kettle, and the idea behind these facilities, if it's done right, is to have what we call gravity flow. In other words, it takes pumps to fill the system or the ponds with water. But when it comes time for harvest, it should just be a matter of opening a slide gate and letting the fish go through their fish transfer pipes, and then sorting out the fish in this collection kettle. And then after this, it gets sent typically into that sediment tank that I was describing earlier. Okay, so this is a fish transfer pipe. It's a 14-inch HDPE. And as you can see, it's wide out. It can, this collection kettle in the background can service anywhere from one to, at Mole Lake, one of these collection kettles services 4 different ponds. But again, it's gravity flow, and you're opening up a gate in the ponds and making sure as part of the design that everything, flows downhill, I guess, so to speak. So this is some of the infrastructure being put into place. These are 14-inch transfers, and you can see the kind of the scope of these sorts of projects. Okay, these are rubber liners. Lacutre had a little bit different type of liner. It's more of a welded thing. It's more of a plasticky thing. This actually is, for lack of a better term, glorified inner tube, heavy duty inner tube. This was in Mole Lake, and you can see the big crew working to install those. Then you can start to see the kind of the scope of these ponds. Oops. Yep. Okay, so this is a sediment tank. This is the one up at Lac de Flambeau. It's got different baffles that, so the water is coming in the foreground of your picture, and it gets filtered out before it gets to the weir and the rocks shoot down into the wetland in the background of the picture. Kind of like a septic tank in a way. And again, technically, by some of the NRCS codes and policies regarding waste, the water coming out of these ponds would have been clean enough to just ascend into this wetland by itself. But the tribes, they aspire to higher water quality standards, and so they put in these extra features to filter out some of the waste. Quickly here, I want to just talk a little bit about the life history of this. This maybe would pique more people's interest. So in the spring, the crews go out. In the background of this picture, way in the back, you can see a pike net out on the lake, and they catch the male and the female walleyes, and they spawn both the males and the females out right in the boat, and everything goes back into the water. So this is a what they call a ripe female that's ready to to have her eggs removed. They do that in a tank, and then they take the sperm from the male and mix that right in the boat. And so you end up with a big female like that will probably have anywhere from probably around 50 to 100,000 eggs. And these, and then once the eggs are fertilized, they get moved into these jars. They're called McDonald jars, and these hold probably 150 to 200,000 eggs. This is a bigger picture of those jars, and you can see the water spilling into these tubs. So when the fry hatch out, they come to the surface of this jar, and then they fall right into this tank. When these fry are first hatched out, they're about the size of a mosquito. And then through all of this, I think it's worth noting that by fall, if they are in this controlled pond environment, these same fish can reach sizes of up to 12 inches. Average is probably 7 inches if they're well fed in the summertime. And when they first hatch out, these ponds need to be prepped with usually they use alfalfa and a yeast product to get the plankton going, and that in turn gets a zooplankton life cycle going, and that's what the fry need to eat for the first month or two. So they're eating zooplankton up until about this time of the year, and then the managers switch to what's different minnow sizes. The first size is very important. It's called a needlehead, even smaller than a crappie minnow. But after they get that first meal and they're used to the meat, so to speak, then they can start to eat bigger and bigger minnows. And by the end of the summer, they're feeding what we call a fathead minnow. And so, yeah, and they eat a lot, and so it's an expense for all of those folks that run these facilities. Okay, so this is a crew at Lac du Flambeau harvesting what we call summer fingerlings. So when they're hatched, they're called fry, and by the time they get to this stage, they're called fingerlings. Okay, the summer fingerlings are probably between 2 and 3 inches, and they do stock those into the lakes already at that size, just to save some money, because you can raise hundreds of thousands of the small ones, but it costs a lot to get the walleyes from this size to what we call fall fingerlings. These are fall fingerlings in this net, and they're being loaded onto a hatchery truck at Lac du Flambeau. These are muskies, so it's not just walleyes that these hatcheries work with. Some of them tried to raise some muskies, and you can already see, that's from 1 year of growth, yeah, they can get pretty good size. I know Bad River also raises perch up there, but walleye is kind of the main thing with these hatcheries. That's a nice look at a fall fingerling. That one's probably 6 or 7 inches, which is about average. I've seen ones that are pushing 12 inches after just one summer of growth. They do slow down substantially after that. A 15-inch walleye that everybody's after for their fishing harvest, it takes about 3 years to grow out. So they do slow down substantially after their first year, especially because they're competing with everything else in a lake environment, and they're not being fed minnows out of a truck. Okay, so then this is the hatchery truck backed up to the lake, and this is the hose coming out of the truck and just dumping in a year class of walleyes. And yeah, everybody's hoping that they'll reach that size. And that's the end of the presentation. If there's, and I sped through that pretty quick. And I think, maybe some of the questions out there might be, well, what lakes get the walleyes? And I think it's kind of a lake by lake basis. These managers do a really good job of assessing the needs in all of these lakes. Some of the lakes up here are excellent producers of walleyes on their own, and other ones might need a year class or two to jumpstart their production. Some lakes, probably for lack of a better term, are more put and take, and it depends on the lake too. If you think about walleyes, they do like certain conditions for spawning, and a certain type of lake. Typically, when you think of a eutrophic lake, you're not thinking of walleye production. And so I would say it probably is more of a lake by lake thing, and the fishery managers, like I said, are always out there surveying. They do a fall survey to assess a particular year class to see how they're doing. And a lot of times that kind of directly relates to whether or not they're going to be stocking that lake in the following year or in the future.